Hello, everyone. It's a delight to have you on yet another episode of the Poems I Love. Today, I will be sharing 4 poems with you. 4 poems exploring the human condition across the continent of Africa. 4 poems by 4 poets from 4 different countries on the African continent. So I hope that you enjoy the poems that I will share today, and I would also try to provide some background, and reasons and explanations as to why I have chosen to share these 4 poems with you on this episode of the Poems I Love. The first is by the South African poet Oswald Mtshali, and it is titled Just a Passerby. I saw them clobber him with carries. I heard him scream with pain like a victim of slaughter. I smelt fresh blood gush from his nostrils and flow on the street. I walked into the church and knelt in the pew. Lord, I love you. I also love my neighbor. Amen. I came out, my earth as light as an angel's kiss on the cheek of a saintly soul. Back home, I strutted, past a crowd of onlookers. Then she came in, my woman neighbor. Have you heard? They have killed your brother. Oh, no, I heard nothing. I have been to church. This is a poem that the last line of it is particularly, for me, it's sad, but it's also makes me somewhat laugh, because for me, I look at the poet in this particular poem, I somewhat learned that self-preservation is like the ultimate quest in the particular society in which the poet found himself. And one of the things that happens in such a society is the fact that people become desensitized to danger, to the plight of other people in that society. He was walking to church to pray. He saw them beating somebody with clubs heavily, and that person would most likely have been beaten to death. He couldn't tell at that point, but then he went on, continued to church, went into the building, and then said a prayer of love to God, that he loved God and that he also loved his neighbor. But the man that he saw them beating to possibly to death on the street at that point in time, because while the poet was in church, he couldn't really say what would become of that person yet, right? He walked past that person, and yet he claims to have a love for God and also a love for his neighbor. And he couldn't dare to intervene in the man's situation to possibly bring about a change. And he continued on, still went back home, got back home, and then his woman neighbor comes in to inform him, have you heard? They have killed your brother. So the person they were actually beating up on the streets was his brother. And he walked past, he turned a blind eye. And even when the neighbor brings the news to him, he says, no, I haven't heard. I have been to church. So it's tragic, but it's also the sad reality I have seen bits of this in news, in conflict reading zones in this country and then maybe in some other parts of the world. For example, in a market where there is a suicide bombing. A suicide bomber comes in, blows up, and then you find that in a few minutes, the people, the traders, some traders in that market whose wares, everybody scampers for safety at first, right? When there is like a suicide attempt. And after the attempt, the bomb blast, the explosion, some people would have died. And then I've seen it in the news where some traders gather their wares and set up stores again and continue trading. Because that tragedy, the reality of that tragedy, they've been somewhat desensitized to it. It has become more like any other incident that would happen and after which life or the survivors have to continue. The second poem I will be reading today is by the poet Jared Angira, who was born in Kenya in 1947. The poem is titled No Coffin, No Grave. He was buried without a coffin, without a grave. The scavengers performed the post-mortem in the open mortuary without sterilized knives in front of the nightclub. Stuttering rifles put up the gun salute of the day. That was a state burial anyway. The car knelt. The red plate wept, wrapped itself in blood, its masters. The diary revealed to the sea. The rain anchored there at last. Isn't our flag red, black, and white? So he wrapped himself well. Who could signal yellow when we had to leave politics to the experts and brood on books, brood on hunger, and schoolgirls grumble under the black pot, sleep under torn mosquito nets, and let lies leak our intestines? The Lord of the Bar, money speaks, madam. Woman magnet, money speaks, madam. We only cover the stinking darkness of the cave of our mouths and ask our Father who is in hell to judge him, the quick and the good. Well, his diary, Submarine of the Third World War, showed he wished to be buried in a gold-laden coffin like a VIP. Under the jacaranda tree beside his palace, a shelter for his grave, and much beer for the funeral party. Anyway, one noisy pupil suggested we bring tractors and plow the land. This particular poem discusses the death of a public office holder, a politician. The politician died in a car crash, and somehow, after the death of the politician, there was heavy rainfall, and the rainfall, washed from the scene of the accident, washed up his diary towards the sea. So this accident most likely happened on the close to the sea, on the beachfront. And looking at his diary, we saw it was revealed in this poem that regardless of the life of privilege and looting and nonchalance about public good, about the commonwealth of the nation, about the past, present, and future of the society that, enabled him to get into that political office. He wanted to be buried in, he detailed his life so much that he spared thoughts for his funeral. He had it all planned. He wanted to be buried in a gold-laden casket and all. And the whole tragedy of it, right? He wasn't even taken to a mortuary, for example. It was the vultures that did the post-mortem because they fed on his corpse. And, thereafter, and this sort of ties to the reality in the first poem that I shared too. One of the school pupils at the scene said, let's just bring a tractor and clear this mess away, get rid of this mess so that life can continue. And what a sad end. Typically, when somebody has given their lives to public service, for example, they should get some sort of honor, right? But it's also what our people, the Yorubas say, for example, when they try to tell us the difference between Oshelu ati Ojelu, the one that serves the common good and the ones that feeds off the commonwealth of the nation. And sadly, that is part of the reality for the political class, across the continent. Different countries complain so much about the high level of corruption amongst the ruling class, amongst the political class. And that is one of the situations, that this poem explores and depicts. So, the third poem I'll be sharing today is by the Ugandan poet Barlow, and it is titled Building the Nation. Today, I did my share in building the nation. I drove a permanent secretary to an important, urgent function. In fact, to a luncheon at the Vic. The menu reflected its importance. Cold bell beer with small talk. Then fried chicken with niceties. Wine to fill the hollowness of the laughs. Ice cream to cover the stereotype jokes. Coffee to keep the PS awake on the return journey. I drove the permanent secretary back. He yawned many times in the back of the car. Then, to keep awake, he suddenly asked, "Did you have any lunch, friend?" I replied, looking straight ahead and secretly smiling at his belated concern, that I had not, but was slimming. Upon which he said with a seriousness that amused more than annoyed me, "Nwanchi, I too had none. I attended to matters of state, highly delicate diplomatic duties, And friend, it goes against my grain, causes me stomach ulcers and wind." He continued, yawning again. The pains we suffer in building the nation. So the PS had ulcers too? My ulcers, I think, are equally painful. Only they are caused by hunger, not sumptuous lunches. So, two nation builders arrived home this evening with terrible stomach pains, the result of building the nation different ways. Now, the 3 poems I've shared so far today were poems that, some of the earliest poems that were on the reading lists for me when I was in secondary school. And I cannot say for sure right now whether they were prescribed for just my set, or because, at that point, what pupils, secondary school pupils in my time typically did was you would read the prescribed texts, for example, for the sets before yours, right? And then you would also read what is prescribed for your own studies at that particular point in time. So this was part of the curriculum, or it could have been for the part of the previous curriculum. But anyway, we were introduced to these poems back in secondary school. And, you know, at that point, I was not so concerned about understanding the social significance, the social import that these poems had. At that point, we read it and we just wanted, typically we were not studying the poems so much for understanding, we were studying them for examinations. And in the years after that, I have revisited these poems so many times because the reality, the social reality, the economic reality in the country that I live, which is Nigeria, and I can bet in a lot of other countries on the African continent, it seems as though that these poems were written just today. The theme, they explore, the way it is explored is still as relevant now as it were in the years that these poems were written, that these poems were published. And that's perhaps what makes this tragic for me, right? Because it is as though some people would say that, oh, you take 10 steps, you take one step forward and you take 10 steps backwards. But looking at the experiences that these poets have depicted in these poems, one can even argue that it is not even as if that there is no evidence that any step forward was taken at all. Anyway, I would not want to bother you with so much sad stories exploring the human condition in our beloved country and then on our beloved continent. I would want to close this episode of, the poems I love with a somewhat less heavy or less burdensome poem by the Nigerian poet Ogaga, Ifowodo, and it is titled, God Punish You, Lord Lugard. The traffic warden's white and yellow sleeve stopped our transport, a Lagos minibus bought from one of the rust heaps of Europe, part of the great scheme to gain reprieve for the city's long-suffering commuters. A horde of beggars swarmed the bus. He beat all to the vantage position in front of the open door. He had good manners, and what he lacked, such as the Queen's English, he faced with uncommon calm and courage. Blind and battered, with a withered left arm, not for him the plain and unlearned. Help me for chop, abeg. God go bless you. Some flourish or polish, he thought, would persuade far more than suffering's worst gown. And so he said, good day, brothers and sisters. Have mercy on me. Please have sympathy. Allah's peace for you. In the bus now, silence and private wars between pause and charity. Have your brother, have sympathy on me. The conductor, scorning all etiquette, laughed loud, pitying country, not beggar, and swore, God punish you, Lord Lugard. Now you bring this English, come Nigeria. The white and yellow arm beckoned the bus. A wild fury of horns startled it past, ferrying us beyond claims of charity and of Lugard's shadow in the black smoke. So, this particular poem, I like it because it is set in the city of Lagos, right? And Lagos is the city of dreams. It's a fast-paced, Lagos, the fast-paced cosmopolis, where lots of music. Lagos is the stuff of legends, the stuff of so many urban legends, of so many myths. It is said that Oweko Ekolongwe Lagos money lives and dies in Lagos. It's the commercial capital of our country, Nigeria. But up till, and I can bet that even up till present times, this kind of scenes and scenario that the poet depicted here, it is something that any commuter, any road user in Lagos can still experience and relate to. So you have a traffic warden who, for example, at a traffic stop, flags down every vehicle and everybody stops. And in the process of waiting for the next instruction from the traffic warden, people who hawk their wares would come to you trying to make a sale. Beggars will come, ask for alms and all. And this particular beggar comes, struggles with English, comes with a withered left arm, and then tries to make, get some money out of the commuters. And in that process, we saw the humor. We saw how funny the bus conductor found, the beggar's attempt at speaking English and all. And then the conductor was able to tie this back to the advent of colonialism. That no, this man would probably have been able to communicate more efficiently using his own language. But then he had to speak the language of business, the language of commerce, the official language that the country has chosen as a post-colonization rather. And, that's English. And he struggled with it. He spoke in forthright in English. It's comical, and, it's that historical reference to not just Lord Lugard, but to the country's contact with the West, and the confusions, the changes, the challenges, the terror, the tremor, the troubles that it has brought into the country, and all of that is captured there. But with a good dose of satire. And that's one of the reasons why I selected this as the final poem for this episode of the Poems I Love. Because yes, we've explored the human condition in our country, on our continents, through the eyes of three poets: Oswald, Mtshali, Angira, Barlow, and then finally Ogaga, Ifowodo. I hope that you enjoyed these 4 poems, and I look forward to seeing you again on the next episode of the Poems I Love.